What is more magical than being a conscious participant in your own life? I want to normalize this concept of magic because I think that it's been kind of separated out from conscious awareness in this society, unfortunately. I want to read this quote by a psychotherapist named Neil Goldsmith. He says, with the exception of biologically based illnesses, psychology must come to be seen as the science of spiritual maturity. We call people neurotic when in reality it's not a medical illness they are suffering from, but spiritual immaturity. We must redefine spirituality too, not as supernatural, but as simply the natural unfolding toward the wise, mature end of the normal curve of human developmental psychology. That was a really beautiful way of putting into words what I've always intuited about spirituality and mental health. They're not separate domains. And I've more recently been able to bridge that divide conceptually, but in my soma, in my body, I've always felt that this was true. And I've been listening to a lot of Joseph Campbell lately, and he talks about how in like Abrahamic religions, there was this separating out of God from nature, and also the personification of God as a human being, lending to more human-centric societies, whereas in Hinduism and Buddhism and Eastern religions, nature was never separate from the divine, or Brahman, or Buddha consciousness. So yeah, there's this idea of we've been separated out from nature, and nature is where all the magic is, because that's where we come from. And so, yeah, you see a lot of superficial enactments of magic. You'll see a lot of kind of these quick adrenaline fixes, whether it's through apps and games and shopping, or fast food, and it's always these quick little hits of magic, but they don't last long. They're not sustainable. And that is what colonization is kind of predicated on, is our addiction, right, to these quick fixes, instead of knowing that we can rely on a deeper source of magic. skandhas are translated to the 5 aggregates. So those are like your aggregates of who you think you are as a self. But there's a concept in Buddhism called anatta, which translates somewhat roughly to no self, or no separate and unchanging self. So nirvana is the recognition that you are not even any of those 5 skandhas. Like you are not even consciousness. That you are, or we are, beyond all of that, and we're all one. And so the recognition that we are beyond all of those concepts, and that's really hard for the ego to accept, because we grew up learning how to exist in a dualistic world, and it's not a bad thing. It's just the way that we had to learn to navigate the physical world, and seeing things as good or bad, or happy or sad, this political party versus this political party, this race against this other race, this gender against this other gender, etc. So this dualistic perception of things, which is a very survival level of consciousness. So yeah, the magic is in recognizing that those are just concepts and we are beyond that. And when we can transcend that duality and be in a non-dual state, then we can begin to actually become an instrument of the divine. And we do that through just radical presence with everything around us. And instead of manipulating or trying to create a certain outcome, we're able to allow things to channel through us. So I think that's what manifesting really is. It's not like this thing where you can just, do things a certain number of times and then you'll manifest a certain outcome. It's more of like alignment with the presence, because the divine spirit, whatever you want to call it, it lives within each of us, and it's this aliveness that's within our physical body. And so if we allow it to do its thing, so to speak, or just allow it to flow with clarity, without all of these obstructions of traumatic imprints and conditioning and ego, then we can actually start to trust in that process of unfoldment, which is a really beautiful thing. Something I wanted to bring up also is neurodivergence. I was listening to a video about how neurodivergence can actually be an asset to awakening, because your mind is more expansive and is more interconnected in different ways than a neurotypical person to begin with, which there's pros and cons to that, of course, because being highly sensitive, you can pick up more energies, good and bad, or harmful or wounded, from the environment. And so this kind of interested me as I learned more about my diagnoses and how they affected me. And I think it's in some way connected to this idea of ritual, and autistic people enjoy routines and kind of have these hyperfixations on certain topics. So, we like to have like a certain routine of things in the morning, and sometimes we get these like kind of obsessions. I was very hyperfixated on gardening for a long time, or soap making and things like that. But I think that can also translate in a way to more gentleness and reverence for the seemingly mundane. So for things that maybe are a bit slower, like understanding and appreciating things in nature, or noticing small details. And in her book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Frances Weller describes the importance of ritual for reconnecting us to sort of those subconscious elements, or mythical elements of our existence, and reconnecting us to nature and how we and our ancestors used to be in relationship with nature instead of seeing it as a separate thing. And I think that is kind of the cure to the anhedonia, or the sort of lack of magic in colonial society. Because in a way, I think colonization, has taken over lands, it has taken over people's nature in those lands, right? And it started to creep into our minds through technology and through social media. And the colonization of the mind is this huge market now. And I think it's sort of pointing in this direction. The only true way to be free now is through the spirit. So reclaiming our spirit, because that always wants to be free. But in a way, I think we're being pushed to see where our true freedom lies. I wanted to share another quote. This is from Benabel Wen. She's another YouTuber who makes videos about Eastern spirituality, including Taoism, Buddhism, and folk magic. She says, "To raise energy for magic, do not look to the so-called supernatural. Instead, look to the natural world around you. The seasons, solstices, and equinoxes, the 4 cardinal directions, and geomancy. More than that, understand change. The successful practitioner understands the philosophy of change. Magic is neither heaven nor earth. It is change. And that also kind of bookends the quote that I shared earlier from Neil Goldsmith, because I've learned to really integrate this understanding of magic and the divine as something very normal. It's not something that's like out there and woo-woo or like inaccessible. It's something that is deeply accessible and is our true nature. And I think when you can awaken into that realization, you bring that magic into your life, and you don't rely on external sources to sustain that thirst for magic, because you are magic and you deserve to live in that way without needing to outsource that sustenance somewhere else. So I think that this process of awakening, healing, integration has really taught me to reconnect to source and reconnect to my divinity, and it's been extremely powerful. That's what I think really true magic is, and I've noticed the way that I see the world is actually more vivid, and my senses are more sensitive. I need less of certain nutrients or things to nourish me, and that's been really interesting too. And I can be really perceptive as far as what's good for me and what's not, and things like that. And I think that is very magical.